Emergency funds are not a sexy topic, but if we call it a war chest, well, game on. Seriously though, I build war chests into every plan I can for clients, especially retirement plans. I love them. Yes, they're great for emergencies, obviously, but they're way more than that. They're also critical for peace of mind throughout retirement. And for the more adventuresome, they're also awesome for taking advantage of opportunities. In this little video, I'm going to bounce through a few different retirement scenarios and how much of a war chest would be ideal in each situation. Hopefully, one of these is at least somewhat similar to your situation and can give you some decent ideas for what you may want to do for yourself. But before I do that, I just want to touch on what an emergency fund / war chest is and what you normally want to have it sitting in. First of all, an emergency fund is not a line of credit. Yes, you can use a line of credit to bail yourself out, but now you just owe that money to someone else. And that could lead to a whole different emergency if things don't play out how you're hoping they will. And that is no bueno. So the best way to protect yourself is by saving your own reserves and keeping it liquid, which is just fancy talk for saying that the money needs to be easily accessible at a moment's notice. And you also want to make sure that it's in something boring, something not volatile, something that won't drop in value right before you need it. So usually that means keeping it in a high interest savings account, which is better than a regular savings account because the interest that you would get is higher. And if your war chest is big enough, then maybe you might even slide a chunk of it into a GIC, a guaranteed investment certificate. Now, high-interest savings accounts really are ideal because they're super liquid and they're super boring. You can have the money anytime you want and there's almost zero risk. So that checks all the boxes. GICs are a little trickier. You can usually get a better interest rate, but you usually have to lock in your money for a certain period of time in order to get that better interest rate. And while that may tick the boring box, it doesn't tick the liquid box. However, as mentioned, if you've got a sizable emergency fund, chances are you're probably not going to need all of it at once. So taking a chunk of it and locking it up for a year or so to get a better rate of return is at least a reasonable idea. And that's the basics. It's that simple. Keep it liquid, at least a big chunk of it, and keep it boring. All right, now on to how much should you have. As usual, that totally depends on the situation, but as a rule of thumb in retirement, I like to see 2 years of your cash needs in the war chest. I know, that might sound crazy to you. We're all used to hearing that we should have 3 to 6 months worth of our expenses in an emergency fund. So 2 years sounds like total overkill, but hear me out. I am not saying that you should have 2 years worth of your expenses. I'm saying that you should have 2 years worth of your cash needs. If you have a pension that covers half of your needs, then you only need your own cash to cover the other half. And that's the chunk you want to make sure you have reserves for. Plus, we need to remember that pre-retirement life is very different from retired life in all sorts of ways. And one of the key ways that it's different is that while we're still working, we can or we generally will do whatever we need to do to earn more money so that we can dig ourselves out of the financial emergency that we're in. But when we're retired, that can cease to be an option. Especially the further you are into retirement, or even if it is an option, it may not be a very palatable one. So having 2 years worth of your cash needs sitting on the side in something that won't drop when the markets do provides you with a huge margin of safety. And like I said before, it gives you huge peace of mind to know that you have backup funds available to get you through long stretches of rough waters if necessary. Now, I've been doing this for a long time now, and the peace of mind factor is huge. No one is looking to increase stress during retirement. No one. Okay, now let's take a look at how this plays out in a few different scenarios. Enter Ferdinand Turneman. Super nice guy. He had his own business, did well for himself and his family, and he has set aside a solid chunk of change to provide for his retirement. But he did come to Canada a little later in life, and so he's going to be getting a reduced amount from Canada Pension Plan and Old Age Security, both of which are guaranteed, as much as anything can be, and indexed to grow with inflation. And since he worked for himself, he doesn't have a pension plan either. So even though he does have a solid amount of money to provide himself with the retirement income, the amount that is guaranteed and indexed to grow with inflation is relatively small compared to the rest. So if Ferdinand wants $60,000 per year in retirement income, and only $10,000 of that is coming from CPP and OAS, then he's got to come up with the other $50,000 from his own resources. And that's not a problem for Ferdinand. He's got lots of investments, and we can see here that he's on track to reach his income goal, and he's even got a decent buffer built in. But let's say that there's a significant market correction right after he retires. Something like what happened in 08-09. Let's say his portfolio drops by 40% and takes 4 years to recover. Look at that. It takes him from 112% on track down to 89% on track of his cash flow goals. And that's because if he still wants the other $50,000 of income, then he'd have to sell a bunch of his investments while they're way down in value to get it. And that hurts. So this is why I recommend having a solid 2 years worth of your cash needs sitting on the side in something liquid and boring. And for Ferdinand, that would be $50,000 times 2, $100,000, liquid and boring. Now, unless he's got that money hidden somewhere else, he'd likely have to take that money from his other investments that would probably have a better long-term rate of return. And so that would actually decrease his percentage that he's on track. See, it went from 112% to 106%, but it would make his situation far more solid. And when the storms occur, which they will, he wouldn't have to sell a nickel of his investments during that period if he didn't want to. Look at what I mean here. Let's throw that 40% market crash at him again a year after he retires. That would drop him down to 84% on track of his goal. But this time, he has a war chest that has not dropped in value while everything else has. So he's going to spend some of that instead of the investments that have dropped in value. Let's just say he takes $45,000 from the war chest for 2 years straight during the storm. And look at what that does. It bumps him from 84% on track to 92% on track. The war chest paid off. This is just a rough illustration. In real life, you would just find ways to adapt if the situation were particularly bad. You would either spend less money or just find some other way to adapt. But the point here is, between his cash reserves and the dividends and the interest that his investments were still making, even while things were down in value, he'd be fine. And he'd be tickled pink that he had a nice, big, fat war chest. And then, once the markets recover, he would begin to replenish his war chest from the growth in his investments over time. All right, now none of us want to be here all day, so I'm going to speed it up a little for the next 2 scenarios. Jenny Rennie has pretty much the opposite scenario. She's been living in Canada her whole life and working full tilt right out of high school. So she's got full CPP and full OAS. And she's got a pretty decent defined benefit pension from her last employer. Now, she wants the same amount of retirement income as Ferdinand, but almost all of her retirement income is guaranteed and indexed. So the amount she has to come up with out of her own pocket is pretty minimal. She only needs to spend $12,000 of her own money each year to hit her goal. So for Jenny, if she had a war chest of $24,000, I'd be all right with that. I mean, really, I'd like to see it be a little bit bigger than that, because only $24,000, I mean, her roof could go and maybe her car could give her a bunch of grief in the same year, and that could chew through $24,000 pretty quickly. But no matter how you look at it, she's just not going to need as much as Ferdinand. Lastly, we have Antoine Canton, and he is a pretty conservative cat. He is not okay with market volatility. So he's got everything in GICs. Guaranteed rates of return, no volatility. Now, he is going to get ravaged by inflation over the long run. It's going to steal his purchasing power, but he will not have to deal with the ups and downs of the markets. Now, while I may be allergic to that particular kind of strategy, for some people, that's going to be the only way that they can really sleep at night. So fair enough, know thyself and do what you got to do. But in these particular situations, since all of the money is already ultra conservative, all you really need to do is make sure that a decent amount of it is liquid so that you have access to it whenever you need it. And with GICs, you can do that by staggering the maturity dates so that there's always money coming available. Aside from that, just make sure there's always a little available in a fully liquid, high-interest savings account, and you're done. Easy peasy, Antoine. Lastly, it is always a good idea to keep adding to your war chest throughout retirement, and there are two key reasons. First, you will dip into it. That's what it's there for, so you want to keep it stocked. Second, inflation is relentless. And high-interest savings accounts and GICs are infamous for not keeping up with inflation. So if you want to keep your war chest healthy, then you've got to keep adding to it, and it is best to simply put that on autopilot so that you don't even got to think about it. Just add it into your retirement income budget so that a little money every month is always going towards your war chest. And that, folks, sums it up.